About 25 years ago, I heard a man named Daniel Goleman, who is a psychologist, talk about a concept that I had never heard before. But since I've learned a good bit about it, it's the concept of emotional intelligence, also called EQ. Any of you familiar with this? Yeah. So IQ, we know, right? This is your intelligence quotient. EQ is your emotional intelligence. Fascinating subject. Whereas IQ, most people believe, is pretty fixed. EQ is something that can develop and grow. You can actually develop your EQ intentionally. Now, that's a fascinating subject all by itself. But this really drew me because as I was looking and learning more about this, it really explained a whole lot of why I spent a great deal of my time confused. Really. Because at that point in my journey, this was not something that I had spent a whole lot of time on, and I was trying to deal with people. And people are confusing. Anyone agree with this? Yeah? We're gonna continue in the book of Acts today, and the subject that I want to start with is this idea of being confused. Because at that point in my life, and a little less so now, but in a whole different swath of areas, I still find myself confused a lot. You ever go into an environment and you're told that the policy is something, and you're like, yeah, but I need this. Yeah, but this is our policy. You ever get this? It's like the policy is more important than the person. What? This just leaves me feeling confused. I don't really understand it. Like, I'm a policy guy. I get it. Systems, big fan. But the policy more important than the person? I don't get it. I go into an environment and I say, hey, you know what? I need some service, and I ask somebody for some customer service in an environment. And they are way more concerned with explaining to me how right they are rather than providing service. Being right is more important than providing service to a customer. How does this leave me feeling? Confused, and I'll never go back there. But that's a different subject, right? Like this whole idea of being confused by relationships, by how people respond and how they interact, this was something that was reality for me. But when I moved from corporate into church world, it was a whole different type of confusion. Because I began to encounter people, and now even today as I speak with pastors and with churches, I still encounter this. This is hard to believe, and it's going to be hard for Southview to grab onto, but I want you to trust me here. There are churches that are way more concerned with what they want than with the mission Jesus gave us. I know this is tough to believe, but trust me. They are way more concerned with being comfortable than with doing what Jesus said and reaching people far from God and seeing them raised to new life in Him. It's crazy, I know, and it leaves me confused. Some of the most confusing times in my life, though, have been with God. When I'm like, okay, God, I don't really understand what you're doing here. I don't really get that. Obviously you're doing something here. Obviously you're involved, but I don't see you. And I'm left confused. And what I want to talk about today in this next section of Acts is this idea about how to handle this when this happens. Because maybe like me, you spend a great deal of time confused. Not just with other people, but with God. We're going to pick up at the end of chapter 22 where we left off last week. Acts chapter 22, starting in verse 30. On the next day, desiring to know the real reason why he was being accused by the Jews, he unbound him and commanded the chief priests and all the council to meet. What is going on? Paul has been arrested. And the religious leaders were trying to kill him. because he was daring to talk about Jesus. He was daring to talk about this idea that God actually loved more than just a select group of people, that God actually loved everybody and wanted everybody to come home. And this was so revolutionary that they wanted to kill him. So Paul is now in an uncomfortable situation. He brought Paul down and set him before them. Looking intently at the council, Paul said, "Brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day." He is before the religious leaders, what's called the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. He is sitting before them now, having to answer for what he has been teaching, for what he's been saying. And this is how he starts. "I have lived my life before God in all good conscience." Well, that's a pretty good start. Nothing really objectionable there. You agree? "And the high priest, Ananias, commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth." Well, that's rude. Like, did he say anything to really justify that? Like, let's go back. "Brothers, I've lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day." Do you see anything offensive? Even in our super hypersensitive day, do you see anything offensive? I don't. But the high priest, Ananias served from about 47 until about 59 AD. And Ananias is not the same. It sounds a little similar to the high priest Annas, but Annas was way earlier. Annas was early in the first century. Ananias was later. Ananias was not well loved. In fact, Ananias was known for his cruelty. And when the Jewish people revolted against Rome just a little bit after, about a decade after this, one of the first things that they did was assassinate Ananias. He was assassinated by his own people because they hated him that much because of his cruelty. Not exactly the nicest guy. He's the high priest. He's the head religious leader of the Sanhedrin. And so, he commands those who stood by Paul to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall." Paul's kind of holding back a little bit, we can tell. "Are you sitting to judge me according to the law, and yet contrary to the law, you order me to be struck?" Now, calling somebody a whitewashed wall maybe doesn't carry the same weight in our day, right? I don't know that I would use that in your bag of insults that you whip out, against somebody, because they're going to be like, "What? You whitewashed wall?" What? I mean, Jesus referred to this a little bit when he called the religious leaders whitewashed tombs, right? And the idea there is that on the outside, it's whitewashed. It looks really pretty and clean and pristine. But on the inside, it's full of death and decay. In this case, a whitewashed wall, the reason you would whitewash a wall is to make it look solid, to make it look like it's healthy and able to stand and support, when really a good stiff wind could blow it down. So you'd whitewash it to make it look like something that it's not. Imagine somebody calling a religious leader that. Something that looks different than what they actually are. This is what Paul is saying. God's going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. And in fact, we know about a decade later what happens to Ananias. Nothing good. He's assassinated. Those who stood by said, "Would you revile God's high priest?" In the Mosaic Law, it says you don't speak ill of your leaders. You don't speak ill of the high priest. Are you really going to break the Mosaic Law sitting right here in front of the Sanhedrin, the religious leaders, and the council? Is this really what you're going to do, Paul? And Paul said, "Oh, I didn't know, brothers, that he was the high priest. For it's written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." I didn't know he was the high priest. He wasn't acting like it. What kind of a religious leader orders somebody to strike somebody else in the mouth when they haven't said something that's blasphemous? I guess I just didn't know because of how he was acting. A little irony here. just a little bit. When Paul perceived that one part of the group in the Sanhedrin were Sadducees and the other part were Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Brothers, I'm a Pharisee, a son of the Pharisees." And what does this mean? These are like parties among the religious leaders, okay? These are like tribes, if you will. And one part is the Sadducees, one part's the Pharisees. There were three others, but we're going to focus on those two in this text. The Pharisees were the ones who believed in the text. They believed in the law, but they also believed in the traditions around the law. And they believed that the oral traditions that had been passed down from generation to generation carried just as much weight as the written text. So you better follow it all. Not just the written law, but the oral tradition. The Sadducees said, that's crazy. We're only going to go with the written text. And furthermore, we're really only going to go with the first 5 books, what's called the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Which meant that the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection at all, of anybody. They didn't believe you were going to be resurrected when you died. They believed that you live this life and then that's it, you're done. They did not believe in resurrection. They did not believe in life after death. They did not believe in a spiritual world at all. So no angels, no demons. They did not believe in eternal life. And this is why they were sad. You see? It's old, but it always works, right? That's how you remember that, right? That's the Sadducees. The Pharisees accepted all of it. They believed in resurrection, spiritual life, life after death, eternal life, the whole bit. So Paul realizes who's in the room. Paul is reading the room, which is what any good leader does. And he cries out, "Brothers, I'm a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees." Paul had been a religious leader before he followed Jesus. And he says, "I'm a Pharisee. It is with respect to the hope and resurrection of the dead that I'm on trial." Now, what's going to happen in this room when he says that? There's going to be a conversation. When he said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say there is no resurrection, nor angels, nor spirits, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. And then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up and contended sharply, "We find nothing wrong in this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him?" And when the dissension became violent, the tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down, take him away from among them by force, and bring him into the barracks. Romans have an outpost there by the temple. They're on the Temple Mount, the Antonia Fortress. And they have a group of soldiers that are always there ready to quench any type of disorder, because what does Rome want more than anything else in all the territories they control? Order. Order. 100% of the time. So their soldiers are always at the ready. And is it possible that there could be disorder in a religious setting? Why, yes, it's possible. And so they have a whole contingent of soldiers there on the Temple Mount ready all the time. And so they see what's going on. And they're like, okay, go get that guy, because there's about to be bloodshed. And so they do. Following night, the Lord stood by Paul and said, "Take courage. For as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." This is not the first time we've heard Jesus tell Paul that he is going to Rome and that he is going to testify about him in the heart of the Roman Empire. Paul, at this point, has been arrested. He's in the barracks of the Roman military. Now what? When it's day, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 who made this conspiracy. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food till we have killed Paul." No more subterfuge, no more trials, no more arguments, no more words. We want him dead, and we're not going to eat until he's dead. Now, therefore, you, along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case more exactly. And we are ready to kill him before he comes near. When a prisoner is being transported, it's a dangerous time. Have him brought, and we'll kill him on the way. Simple and clean. Now, the son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush, so he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Now, who is Paul's sister? We don't know. This is the first time we've heard Paul had a sister, much less that he had a nephew. And Luke just throws them into the story like everybody knows what's going on here. You know, Paul's sister. And you know his nephew. Of course, sure, no problem. Apparently, Paul had a sister. And apparently, she had a son, his nephew. And apparently, they lived nearby. Maybe he stayed with them when he was in Jerusalem. We don't know. We don't know any of this. But Luke just throws it in there, just as a little aside, as we tend to do when we're telling a story. We just throw things in. We just throw details in, not thinking maybe not everybody knows who his sister is. Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him." So he took him, brought him to the tribune, and said, "Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring this young man to you as he has something to say to you." The tribune took him by the hand, going aside, asked him privately, "What is it that you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire somewhat more closely about him. But don't be persuaded by them. For more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, who've bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they're ready, waiting for your consent." So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, "Tell no one that you've informed me of these things." And then he called two of the centurions and said, "Get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. And also provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix the governor." Caesarea was the Roman capital of this region. They did not capital in Jerusalem. They capital in Caesarea. We've seen Caesarea multiple times already through Acts. And there was a palace there that Herod the Great, way back in the days of Herod the Great, where he had built a palace there, one of his royal residences. Well, when Herod died and the Romans began to send procurators in, governors, what would happen is they would take over some of those residences. And that's what they did. They took over this residence at Caesarea. So this is actually where the Roman leader is going to live, at Herod's palace. What this tribune is saying there in Jerusalem is, we need to get Paul to Caesarea because we need to provide protection for him. He's a Roman citizen. He deserves Roman justice. And it seems to be a little too hot to handle around here. How many soldiers did they send with Paul? 470. Does that feel like overkill to anybody else in the room? It's Paul. It's one guy. Why would you send 470 troops to protect this one guy? Well, it goes back to how they viewed Roman citizenship. If you attacked a Roman citizen, you're attacking Rome. And how does Rome feel about being attacked? Not so good. They protected their citizens. Citizenship was a very big deal. And so they're going to protect Paul because he's a Roman citizen. He deserves Roman justice, and he is going to get where he's going to go. And so they're going to provide whatever means necessary. If there are 40 people lying in wait to catch him as he's going to the Sanhedrin, how many could there be lying in wait anywhere else? So we're going to make sure that strategically we have enough to overcome whatever could be against us. Hence, 470 troops. He wrote a letter, the tribune, he wrote a letter to this effect. Claudius Lysias, that's the name of the tribune, to His Excellency, the Governor Felix. Greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen. Desiring to know the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. And so the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul, brought him by night to Antipatris. And on the next day, they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. When they had come to Caesarea and they delivered that letter to the governor, they presented Paul also before him. And on reading the letter, he asked what province he was from. And when he learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. And he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. That's where we're going to stop. So Paul has now been rescued again by a Roman officer. This is the third time that Paul is rescued by a Roman officer from the hands of the Jewish people, the Jewish leaders, who are intent on killing him. He's rescued again. He's sent to Caesarea, and he's going to be there for a bit. Paul is now in the hands of the Roman justice system. And this is what will take him to Rome. This is how he will get to Rome. He will not be outside their custody again until he gets there. I think Paul is writing about what we've just read about today in his last letter to a young pastor named Timothy. In 2 Timothy, he refers to this, I believe. He says, at my first defense, no one came to stand by me, but all deserted me. May it not be charged against them. But the Lord stood by me and strengthened me, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth. I think he's talking about what we've just read about in Acts. He was there. He had to defend himself. He had to present a defense, and there was no one with him. Nobody to stand up for him, nobody to speak for him. It was just him. And Jesus appeared to him to strengthen him, to encourage him, to let him know you are not alone. No matter how it looks, and no matter how it feels, you are not alone. And later, when he's writing to this young pastor named Timothy, he remembers that. And he shares it with him as a point of encouragement. As I'm reading this and looking at this, I wonder, did Paul feel abandoned by other people? We know there were a lot of people around Paul pretty much all the time. Paul never did ministry alone. There were always people around him. He always operated in teams. But on this occasion, first before the Sanhedrin, and then when he's going to be taken to Caesarea, he's alone. And there's nobody with him. Where is everybody? Where'd they go? Did he feel abandoned? It would have been normal. You know what else would have been normal is to be praying and saying, God, I understand, you've called me to this and it's going to be hard and I've been warned about that. We looked at that last week. Everybody was warning Paul, if you keep going, you go to Jerusalem. It's a hard road ahead. You keep going. Agabus, the prophet, right, bound him up with his belt and was like, this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to be tied up like a calf at a rodeo. And Paul kept going. So it's not like he didn't have a heads up. But I wonder if in this moment, when he feels that sense of abandonment, when he feels like, where is everybody? I wonder if he's praying, and it sounds a little bit like this, but I thought there would be people with me. I knew it was going to be a hard road, but I thought I would not be alone. But I thought this would go down a little differently. I thought I was going to go to Rome under my own power. I gotta stay in jail longer? I've been in jail. I've been stoned. I've been beaten. I gotta do this again? I thought this was going to happen differently. I thought this was going to look differently. I wonder if that's where Paul was. And the reason I wonder that is because I've been there. God, I thought this was going to look, but I thought, Paul is never given all of the details. Paul is told more than sometimes many of us. But he's never given all the details. He's not told every step of what's going to happen. He will go to Rome, 100%. But it's going to be as a prisoner. He didn't get that part. He got the first part. He didn't get the details. Oh, and by the way, it's going to take 2 years of imprisonment in Caesarea before it happens. 2 years in Caesarea, in Herod's palace. Paul doesn't get told that part. You're going to go to Rome. But what about the rest? We want to know the rest. We want to know the details. Except for, I believe, if God were to tell us the details, we would hightail it the other direction so fast, it would look like a Bugs Bunny cartoon, right? You're going to go to Rome. We don't get all the details of it. And what's Paul's response going to be? How's he going to respond to this? In jail again. Not in control again. Can't do anything about my circumstance or my situation again. You know how we see him respond? We see him respond the same way we saw him respond last week and the week before that, and pretty much every week for the last year and a half that we've been in Acts. And you saw this verse last time. The Lord's will be done. I told you would see that again because this is the mindset that Paul has. This is the frame through which he is looking at his circumstances. Your mindset's a funny thing. Your mindset is actually made up of 3 things. Same as Paul's. What you believe about yourself, what you believe about other people, and what you believe about the world. Those 3 things make up your mindset about anything. Understanding and being aware of what you believe about yourself, about other people, and about the world is one of the best things you can do for your own personal growth and development. What Paul has been teaching everywhere he goes is how people are to understand who they are, how God sees them, how they are to see one another, and how this whole thing works together. This is what we see again and again and again. And now Paul has to put it into practice himself. Again. For the umpteenth time. But I thought it would be different. I thought it would look different. I thought it would feel different. I have to wonder if that wasn't what was going through Paul's head. But the Lord's will be done is where he always landed. I don't always understand. And I don't think Paul did either. I think Paul was confused. I think Paul was confused, and I think as month turned into month, turned into month, turned into a year, turned into a second year, I think Paul was really confused. I thought I was going to Rome. I thought I was going to talk about Jesus in Rome. I'm confused, God. But Paul knew something that I think so often we forget. And the prophet Isaiah recorded this for us way back in Isaiah chapter 46. Remember the former things of old. Paul could have recited this by heart. Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. There is one God, and I'm not him, and neither are you. We do not know it all. God knows the end from the beginning. He's outside time. He can see it all. That doesn't mean everything that happens is something he chooses to happen, because he gives us free will. And we use that sometimes for good and sometimes, well, not. But he can see it all. I don't. I don't see the end from the beginning. I don't understand what's going to happen next. And I don't understand the details between here and where God says he's going to take me. And neither do you. We don't know it all, but God does. And this is what Isaiah reinforces and what he reminds us of and what Paul would have been able to quote from memory. We don't know it all, but God does. And he can be trusted. He sees it all. I think there were moments when Paul struggled. I think there were moments when he struggled with trusting God with another day of this. Another day of this. Another week of this. Another month of this. Paul kept saying, God knows. He sees. He hears. And he can be trusted. So here's the question I've got for us. For you and for me, what is it that we are struggling to trust God with today? Every one of us has situations in our lives where, if we're honest, we're a little bit confused. We thought it was going to look different than this. We thought this was going to work out a little differently. We thought it was going to play out or happen differently than it did. And I'm a little bit confused, God. What does God want? He wants us to trust him. He wants us to understand that he sees it all. That he knows the end from the beginning. That he sees it all and that he can be trusted. What are you struggling to trust God with? What are the situations in your life that, from your perspective, just don't make sense? And your response might be like what I think Paul's was, but I thought, that's fair, that's valid. As long as followers of Jesus, we come out on the other side with, but I don't know it all. And God does. And he can be trusted. This is what we're going to see as we finish the book of Acts. We're going to see Paul in very uncomfortable situations. We're going to see Paul enduring and dealing with things most of us have never had to deal with. And through it all, he keeps that mindset, the Lord's will be done, because he can be trusted. He can be trusted. He's not asleep at the switch. Is that where you are today? Do you believe that God can be trusted no matter what you see, no matter what you feel? This is what I want for you. I'm not going to say it's not hard, because it is. And it's a daily struggle. But this is what Scripture calls us to. This is what the book of Acts challenges us to, especially in the difficult moments. He can be trusted. Let me pray that for you right now. Heavenly Father, I think everybody in this room would agree that we often encounter moments that are so confusing. When we do not understand. When we cannot see where you are working or how you are working or why you are doing what you are doing or why you don't do what we thought you would. And I think that's where Paul was. May we draw encouragement and inspiration from Paul's example. One who continued to press forward, knowing the road was not going to be easy, not knowing exactly how hard it was going to be, but still pressing forward, despite feeling lonely. We know what Jesus said. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will be with you always, even to the very end of the age. And if we look at Paul's story, we see so many times that Jesus came and encouraged him because he needed that. And so do we. I believe that's why we gather together, so that we can be encouraged together, so that we can be reminded of what you have done, knowing that you never change. And what you did for Paul, you can do for us. You guided him through circumstances and situations not of his choosing. And you will guide us through the same. My prayer for each one here is that we would believe in the midst of the storm that you can be trusted because you see it all. The beginning from the end. And the end from the beginning. I pray this for all of us in the name of Jesus. Amen.